I don't know why I still come back here every winter. The road to the frozen lake cabin always looks shorter in memory, but in reality it stretches longer each year, like it's trying to keep me from arriving. Snow falls in thin, silent sheets, soft enough to swallow sound, heavy enough to make the world feel erased. The trees on both sides lean inward as I drive, their black branches tangled like they're watching me pass. The cabin appears the same as always, half buried in white, windows dull and blind, chimney breathing nothing. But every time I step out of the car, I feel it, that strange pressure in the air, like the lake is holding its breath beneath the ice. I tell myself I come here for silence, for peace, for sleep. But that isn't true anymore, because the lake doesn't stay frozen the same way twice. And the footprints I find leading away from the cabin are never mine. That's when I saw it, just beneath the ice moving. The road ended long before the cabin appeared. Snow covered everything like a soft erase. White fog hung low over the frozen lake, thick and still, swallowing the horizon until there was nothing left to trust. I parked without turning off the engine at first. The sound of it felt like the only proof I was still part of the world. Warm air pressed against my hands through the steering wheel, but outside the glass, everything looked dead and waiting. The cabin stood near the edge of the lake. Same shape as I remembered, same tilted roof, same dark windows that never really reflected light properly. But something felt misplaced, not broken, not changed, just wrong in a quiet way. I stepped out. The cold hit instantly, sharp and dry, crawling into my sleeves and under my collar like it already knew me. The snow under my boots didn't crunch the way it should. It felt softer, almost damp, like it had already been walked on, but I hadn't walked there yet. The cabin door was already slightly open. I don't remember leaving it that way. Inside, the air was warmer than outside, too warm for a place that had been empty for months. My breath slowed as I stepped in, each movement sinking into thick silence. Dust covered the table, but the chair beside it looked pulled back, like someone had just stood up. I stopped. The wood floor creaked once behind me. I turned. Nothing. Only the hallway stretching into dim shadow. Only the soft hum of stillness pressing against the walls. Then I noticed the window. A scratch mark ran across the inside glass. Fresh, pale, thin like it was written with something sharp and careful. I moved closer. My reflection blurred in the frost, and the words became clear. You came back. My throat tightened, but no sound came out. I touched the glass. It was warm, not cold like it should have been, not frozen. Warm like something had just pressed against it from the other side. Outside, the lake stretched flat and frozen under heavy white sky, but its reflection didn't match. In the reflection, the cabin was alive. A faint movement passed through the windows. Slow, like someone walking inside, just out of sight. I stepped back. The floor creaked again, this time closer. I didn't turn. I already knew there was nothing behind me. The air inside felt heavier now. Not colder, not warmer, just heavier, like the cabin had started remembering that I was here. Outside, the lake stayed still, but the reflection of the lake shifted slightly, like something underneath the ice had turned its head. I backed away from the window slowly, my breath shallow, my fingers numb even inside my gloves. The cabin didn't feel empty anymore. It felt aware, and somewhere deep beneath the frozen lake, something moved again, slow, patient, like it had been waiting for me longer than I had ever been gone. The night settled over the frozen lake without sound, no wind, no rustling trees, only the thin pressure of cold air pressing against the cabin walls like something leaning closer. I didn't sleep. The cabin stayed too warm for sleep anyway. That same strange heat lingered in corners, soft and uneven, like breath trapped in wood. Sometime after midnight, I looked outside. The world had changed again. Fresh snow covered everything in a clean white layer. Smooth, untouched, the kind of silence that feels almost fragile, like it could break if you step too hard. But then I saw them. Footprints. They circled the lake. Slow, uneven impressions pressed into the snow, like someone had walked in loops for hours. Not running, not lost, just circling. I pressed closer to the glass. My own breath fogged the window, but the prints stayed clear. They didn't come from the cabin. They led toward it. I checked the door. Still locked from inside. Still closed. I stood there a long time, listening to the silence inside the cabin press against my ears. I hadn't gone out. I knew I hadn't, and yet the footprints were fresh. I stepped outside anyway. The cold hit harder than before, like the night had thickened while I wasn't looking. Snow slipped under my boots, soft and sinking without resistance. The footprints were clearer up close. Human, barely distorted by wind. They moved in a wide circle around the lake, never breaking pace, never stopping. I followed them. Each step felt louder than it should have been, like the lake was listening beneath the ice. The prints led toward the center, where the ice was thickest, where the lake should have been safest. I stopped before reaching it. Something under the ice. A shadow, not reflected, not above, beneath, standing upright, perfectly still, my breath caught, shallow and sharp, freezing instantly in the air. The shadow didn't move. It just waited under the frozen surface like it had always been there, like it had learned patience long before I arrived. A faint crack ran across the ice. I stepped back fast. The sound didn't repeat. No echo, no follow-up, just silence again, heavier than before. I turned away. The footprints behind me were gone. Fresh snow had already erased them, as if they had never existed at all. I walked back to the cabin faster now, boots pressing deeper into the snow that suddenly felt softer, too soft, like it was trying to slow me down. When I reached the door, I stopped again. The handle was wet. Cold droplets clung to it like someone had just touched it from the inside. I didn't open it right away. Behind me, the lake stayed still, but I could feel it, that same presence beneath the ice. Still standing, still watching, and this time, I wasn't sure it had stayed under the water. The cabin felt different after I came back inside. Not warmer, not colder, just closer, like the walls had shifted a few inches inward while I wasn't paying attention. I stood in the middle of the room for a long time, listening. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It had layers now, thin, overlapping stillness that made it hard to tell what was real and what was just waiting. Outside, the lake remained frozen, but the window facing it no longer felt like a window. It felt like an eye. That's when I saw the light. At first, I thought it was reflection from the snow, a trick of frost, a bend in the glass. But then it blinked, inside the cabin window. A second light, dim, warm, moving slowly like a candle behind fog glass. I stepped closer, without meaning to. My breath hit the pane, cold and uneven. The glass didn't respond the way it should have. It stayed warm in one spot, warmer than the rest. And inside that warmth, a silhouette, sitting, perfectly still, facing me. I stopped breathing. There was no one else in the cabin. I knew that, but the figure inside the window didn't agree. It tilted its head slightly, matching mine. My hand lifted without thought. Slow, uncertain, the silhouette mirrored it. Perfectly, too perfectly. Like it wasn't copying me. Like it already knew what I would do before I did it. I stepped back. The light inside the window flickered. Once, twice, and then steadied again. The silhouette didn't move during the flicker, but it stayed visible, even when everything else dimmed. That's when I noticed something wrong. It wasn't inside the glass anymore. It was on the glass, not behind it, not reflected, pressed against it, as if the window was only a thin layer separating two versions of the same room. I reached for the curtain instinctively. My fingers froze midair, because the silhouette moved again. But it didn't match me this time. It moved a second late. Too slow. Wrong timing. Like something inside it had to think before copying. The power inside the cabin flickered. A soft dip in brightness. And in that moment, the silhouette stopped moving. Completely. But it didn't disappear. It stayed there. Still sitting. Still watching. And then it smiled. Not wide. Not obvious. Just a small shift at the corner of his mouth. Delayed, like the expression arrived after the decision had already been made. My reflection in the glass didn't smile back. It didn't move at all anymore. Outside, The frozen lake stayed silent, but the reflection of the cabin behind me shifted slightly, like something had just stood up inside it. The night deepened in a way that didn't feel natural. Not darker, not quieter, just heavier. Inside the cabin, the air had started to feel uneven, like different temperatures were passing through the same space without mixing. One moment my breath was visible, the next it vanished before it could form. I sat near the floorboards without realizing it. Listening, that was when I heard it. A hum, low, constant, far beneath everything. At first, I thought it was the wind trapped under the ice. But the wind doesn't stay in one note. This did. The sound didn't rise or fall. It just existed, steady and deep, like something large breathing slowly under frozen water. I stood up. The floor creaked under my weight. And then the hum responded. Not louder, closer. I froze. The cabin went silent again, but only for a moment. Then the wood beneath my feet shifted with a soft, slow pressure. Not breaking, not cracking, just pressing upward from below, like something was testing the ceiling of the lake itself. I moved toward the window. Outside, the ice had changed. Circular patterns had formed across the surface. Faint spirals pressed into the snow like fingerprints left by something too large to see. They weren't random. They were deliberate, and they spread outward from a single point beneath the lake. I pressed my hand against the glass. It was warm again, but this time the warmth pulsed, slowly, in rhythm, like a heartbeat trapped inside the window frame. Then I heard it, breathing, not from outside, from beneath the cabin floor. Deep, wet, measured. I stepped back, but the breath followed my movement, as if the entire lake beneath me had shifted to stay aligned with where I stood. A sharp crack echoed outside. I rushed to the window. The ice had split slightly, just a line, thin, dark, but instead of water rising, cold air escaped. A breath of frozen air pushed upward through the crack, like something exhaling from below the world. The cabin lights flickered once, then steadied. The hum beneath the floor grew louder, not chaotic, still controlled, still patient. Something knocked, once, from under the cabin, not hard enough to break anything, just enough to be sure I heard it. I stepped back into the center of the room. The floor felt different now, softer in some places, harder in others, like the lake beneath the cabin was no longer frozen evenly, like something had started shaping it from below. Another knock came, slower this time, closer, and I realized something that made my chest tighten in a way I couldn't explain. The rhythm wasn't random. It was waiting for an answer. The cabin stayed quiet after the knock stopped. Not peaceful quiet, not empty quiet. The kind of quiet that feels held, like the air is waiting to be used again. I sat near the small wooden table, not trusting the windows anymore. Outside, the frozen lake remained still, but I could no longer look at it without feeling like it was looking back first. That's when the radio turned on. No warning, no sound of power returning. Just a sudden crackle of static in the corner of the room. I froze. The old radio on the shelf wasn't plugged in. It never worked properly before, but now it hummed softly, as if it had always been awake and was only choosing this moment to speak. Static filled the cabin, thick, layered, uneven. Then a voice broke through, a child's voice, soft, calm, too clear for something coming through broken signal. It repeated numbers, coordinates, slowly, carefully, like it already knew I would understand them. I stood up without thinking. The numbers matched nothing I wanted them to match, but I recognized the place anyway. This cabin, the lake, here. The radio crackled again. Static rose, then dipped like something breathing through the frequency. Then my name came through. Not loud, not shouted, just spoken, like someone standing too close behind me. I turned around fast. Nothing, only the cabin walls. The same dim wood, the same uneven shadows. But the radio continued. My name repeated again, and again, each time slightly slower, like it was learning how to say it properly. I reached for the radio dial, but my hand stopped halfway because the voice changed. Now it wasn't child. Now it was almost familiar, Not fully mine, but close enough to make my skin tighten. Don't look down. The words cut through the static cleanly. Everything else stopped. No hum, no crackle, no background noise. Just silence after the sentence. I stood completely still. The radio light flickered once, then stayed on. Outside, through the window, the lake began to glow faintly. A soft blue light under the ice. Not bright, not harsh, just alive, spreading slowly across the frozen surface like something underneath had opened its eyes and was now looking upward. The radio clicked again, but no new voice came, only static returning. Soft, patient, as if whatever spoke had already said everything it needed to say. And now it was waiting to see what I would do next. The glow from the lake stayed even after the radio went silent. A faint blue pulse under the ice. Slow, rhythmic, like something still awake beneath the frozen surface, watching the cabin without blinking. Inside, the air felt thinner now. Not cold, not warm, just stretched, like the room had been pulled slightly out of shape and hadn't settled back properly. I moved toward the door without deciding to. My hand hovered near the handle. I hesitated because I realized something strange. The door wasn't fully closed anymore. It had shifted, just a fraction, enough to notice. A thin line of darkness showed along the edge, like the outside wasn't simply outside anymore, like it was pressing inward. I touched the handle. Cold, damp, not frost, not snow, something else. I pulled it open. It opened inward, slowly, normal, but the hallway beyond it wasn't right. It stretched too far, longer than the cabin should allow. Dim light faded down its length, but it didn't end where it should. It kept going, and going, like the space inside had forgotten its limits. I stepped closer. The floorboards creaked under me. Too loud, too sharp. The sound didn't echo the way it should have. It just vanished halfway down the hallway, like the corridor swallowed it. Then I heard footsteps. Not mine. Somewhere ahead. Soft, measured, moving away from me. I froze. The hallway was empty, but the sound continued. One step, pause, another step, then silence again. I leaned forward slightly, and that's when I saw them. Wet footprints on the wooden floor, leading away from the door. Not fresh snow, not mud, something darker, something that didn't belong inside wood. They moved toward the far end of the hallway, then stopped, right where the light broke into shadow. I didn't move, but the footprints did. One more appeared, closer, facing back toward me now, as if whatever made them had turned around. The air in the hallway changed, heavier, tighter. The walls seemed closer than before. I reached for the door instinctively and slammed it shut. The sound was loud, too loud. It should have echoed, but it didn't. Instead, the cabin outside the door felt unchanged, like closing it hadn't affected anything beyond my hands. Then, a soft knock came from the other side. One tap, patient. I stepped back. The handle trembled slightly, not turning, not opening, just reacting. Another knock followed, closer. Inside the cabin, the blue glow from the lake outside flickered through the window, and for a brief moment, I wasn't sure which side of the door I was supposed to be on anymore. The cabin felt quieter after the door stopped moving. Not safe, just paused, like something on the other side had decided to wait instead of leave. I stayed in the main room for a long time, listening to the wood, to the air, to the faint pressure of the lake beneath everything. But silence here was never empty. It had layers now, thin ones, breathing ones. When I finally lay down, I didn't mean to sleep. I only needed to stop moving. The bed creaked softly under my weight, old with shifting like it remembered every person who had ever rested here or never left. The room was dark except for a faint pale light slipping through the curtains. Snowlight, cold, blue, still. At first, everything was normal. Then I heard it, a scratch, underneath the floorboards. Slow, careful, like something was tracing the underside of the cabin with long, patient fingers. I sat up slightly. The sound stopped, then started again. Closer, not random, not scattered. focused, like it knew exactly where I was lying. I pressed my hand to the bed. Warm, too warm. The warmth wasn't for me. It felt like something had been there before I lay down and hadn't fully left yet. Another sound followed, not scratching this time, a soft shifting, like something adjusting its position under the cabin. The floorboards near the bed creaked once, then settled. I held my breath. The silence returned for a moment, but it didn't feel like relief. It felt like attention. I slowly lowered my gaze toward the floor. The darkness under the bed looked thicker than usual. Not empty space. Something dense. Something that didn't reflect light properly. That's when I saw it. Hair. Dark strands tangled between the cracks of the wood beneath the cabin. Not buried. Not hidden. Just there, like it had grown upward through the ice and wood, and stopped just before reaching me. I moved back slightly. The bed creaked again, but I hadn't touched it. A whisper came next, so faint I almost thought it was inside my own head. Not words, more like breath shaping itself into sound. The bed grew warmer, then colder, then warm again, unstable, like something underneath was reacting to me in real time. I pulled my hand away. A sudden pressure formed under mattress, not lifting, not pushing, just pressing upward slowly, deliberately, like a hand testing the space between me and the floor. A frost pattern formed under the bed frame, spreading outward in thin pale lines, and in the center of it, a handprint, not mine, not fully formed, but unmistakably human in shape. I moved off the bed immediately. The moment my weight left it, the pressure stopped. The room went still again, but the warmth stayed behind, lingering in the mattress like a memory that hadn't finished happening. I stood in the center of the room, staring at the bed, waiting, listening. Under the floorboards, something shifted once more, slow, careful, like it was no longer under the bed, but learning the shape of the room above it. The night outside looked deeper than before, not darker, deeper, like the sky had moved further away from the lake, leaving more empty space between me and anything familiar. The cabin stayed warm in uneven patches, but I no longer trusted where that warmth came from. I avoided the windows for a while, until I heard it, a soft cracking sound from outside, not ice breaking violently, something slower, careful, like pressure being tested instead of force being used. I moved toward the window anyway. The lake was still frozen solid, but something had changed. There was a shape in the distance. At first, I thought it was just a shadow in the snow, but the snow didn't form shapes like that. This was too structured, too intentional. A boat, wooden, old, sitting in the middle of the frozen lake like it had always belonged there, except it hadn't. It wasn't there yesterday. I was sure of it. I pressed close to the glass. My breath fogged the surface, but the boat remained clear in view. No footprints led to it. No tracks. No marks. Just smooth ice between the shore and that impossible object. The air inside the cabin felt slightly warm again, as if reacting to my attention. I stepped outside before I could stop myself. The cold was immediate, sharper than before. It didn't just touch skin. It felt like it entered it, waiting beneath it. Each step toward the lake felt wrong. Not dangerous. Wrong. Like I was walking into a memory that hadn't been fully written yet. The boat sat in the center of the ice. Dark wood. Still. Waiting. As I got closer, I noticed something impossible. Steam, rising from inside it. Soft. Constant. Like hot water was sitting in its base, defying everything the frozen world should allow. I stopped a few meters away. The ice beneath me didn't crack. It didn't even respond, as if it had already decided I was allowed to stand there. Inside the boat, I saw a movement. Slow, submerged. Something beneath the surface of invisible water. A figure, rowing, but not above the ice. Below it, the oars moved in slow rhythm, pushing through something I couldn't see, but could somehow feel. Water that shouldn't exist. My breath caught. The ice around the boat remained untouched, as if it refused to acknowledge what was happening inside it. Then the figure paused. It tilted upward slightly, as if it knew I was watching. The steam inside the boat thickened, and for a brief moment, I saw a reflection in it. Not mine, not the boat's. Something looking back from the wrong side of the world. I stepped back instinctively. The ice didn't protest, didn't crack, didn't change, but the boat remained exactly where it was, waiting, as if it had been placed there for me to eventually notice and never leave again. The storm arrived without warning. Not loud, not violent, just sudden. One moment the lake was still, and the next, the world outside the cabin was swallowed in drifting white motion, like the sky had fallen apart into endless fragments of snow. I stood by the window for a long time, watching it blur everything beyond recognition. Then I saw something standing outside. A mirror, tall, full length, resting upright in the middle of the storm. It didn't make sense. Nothing should stand like that in wind this strong. But it didn't move, didn't tilt, didn't fall, just waited. I stepped closer. The glass of the window trembled slightly with the wind outside, but the mirror's surface remained perfectly still. Too still. It reflected the cabin, clearly, even though it wasn't facing it directly. I turned my head slightly. The reflection didn't match perfectly. It was delayed. Just a fraction. Like the image needed time to understand what it was showing. I saw myself inside it, standing, in the cabin, but not moving with me. I was already standing, perfectly still, facing forward. But I wasn't doing that right now. My breath caught. The version of me in the mirror lifted its head slightly, slow, controlled, like it was waking up inside the reflection instead of inside the room. Snow hit the mirror, or tried to, but it didn't stick. It slid away before contact, like the surface rejected the storm entirely. Something knocked from inside it, soft, 3 taps, evenly spaced. I froze. The sound didn't come from outside. It came from the mirror itself. I stepped back instinctively. The reflection didn't follow. It stayed closer to the glass than I was, closer than it should have been. Then it smiled, but not at me, not exactly. It smiled a second after I felt my own expression go still, like it had already decided what I would feel before I felt it. The storm outside thickened. Snow moved in unnatural patterns around the mirror, circling it without touching, like it was being avoided or protected. I tried to look away, but the reflection didn't let go. Even when I turned slightly, it stayed centered in my vision, watching, waiting, and in that delayed stillness, I realized something that made my chest tighten. The mirror wasn't showing me the cabin. It was showing the cabin as it would be when I stopped moving inside it. The storm outside didn't stop. It only changed shape. The snow no longer fell in straight lines. It drifted in slow curves, like something was gently stirring the air just beyond sight, rewriting how it moved. Inside the cabin, time felt uneven again, not broken, layered. I found myself standing in the kitchen without remembering walking there. The table was slightly different. Not new, not old, just arranged in a way I didn't recognize. A chair faced a window that I never pulled out. A cup sat on the table, with faint steam rising from it. But I hadn't made anything. I stepped back. The floor creaked softly beneath me, and the sound felt familiar in a way that made my skin tighten, like I had heard it before in another version of this moment. Then I saw the photograph, pinned near the shelf. It showed the cabin, but the angle was wrong. In the photo, the door was open, and I was standing outside it, looking in, but I didn't remember taking it, or standing there, or opening the door. My memory didn't match what I was seeing. I pressed my fingers against my temple, tried to hold the timeline steady in my mind, but it slipped like water through cracks. A second memory pushed in. The same cabin, same lake, same snow, but the chair was not where it was now. The cup was empty, and I was already inside the room, sitting, not standing, not moving, just waiting. I stumbled backward. The wall felt slightly closer than before, or maybe I was closer to it. I couldn't tell anymore. Another photograph appeared on the table. I don't know when. I didn't see it being placed. It wasn't there a moment ago. This one showed me sleeping, on the bed, but I was standing right now, looking at it. The image and the moment refused to agree. My breath slowed. The cabin creaked again, not from wind, from inside, like something shifting positions between versions of the same space. The light in the room flickered softly, and for a second, I saw another version of the kitchen. Same place, same layout, but darker, older, and I was not standing. I was gone, or already replaced. The image snapped back to normal before I could fully understand it, but the feeling stayed. Then the final memory came. Not mine, but inside my head anyway. I was never leaving the cabin. Not once. No arrival. No return. Only this place. Only this moment stretching backward without end. I stepped away from the table. Slowly. Careful not to disturb anything that might not agree on what now was supposed to be. The cabin stayed quiet, but the silence felt divided, like it was listening to two different versions of itself at the same time, and neither of them were fully certain which one I belonged to. The morning light never really arrived. It only appeared to, a pale, washed glow pressed to the frozen sky, but it didn't feel like sunrise. It felt like the world had briefly turned brighter, without meaning to. The lake outside was still frozen, still silent, still waiting. I stood near the window longer than I should have, because something in the ice had changed, not the surface. The depth, thin fractures ran across it, faint as veins, spreading in slow branching lines toward the center of the lake. And inside those cracks, I saw movement. At first, I thought it was reflection, but reflections don't show time. The ice showed scenes, not all at once, one by one, like the lake was replaying moments it hadn't decided to live yet. I saw myself walking outside at night, standing at the dock, not moving, just staring into the dark water. But I wasn't there right now. I was inside the cabin, watching it happen from a different moment. The vision shifted. Another crack lit up. This time, I was running, slow, unsteady, across the ice. My mouth was open, but no sound came to the frozen surface. Only silence, like the lake, had muted me before I even spoke. Behind me, in the ice vision, a shadow, tall, still, following, always slightly delayed, but never stopping. I stepped back from the window. The floor creaked beneath me, and for a moment, I wasn't sure the sound belonged to this moment or one of the others I had just seen. The ice shifted again. Another crack, another future. This time I was closer to the cabin door, hands pressed against it, trying to open it, but something outside was closer than I was, standing between me and leaving, watching, waiting. The scene froze mid-movement, then restarted, exactly the same, over and over, like the lake couldn't decide which version should happen first. My breath slowed, not calm, controlled, like something was matching my rhythm from the other side of the ice. I looked away from the window, but I still saw it, even without looking. The future didn't disappear when I ignored it. It stayed, pressed into the edges of my vision, waiting for me to catch up to it. Then the ice showed something worse, a version of me screaming, head tilted back, hands shaking, standing in the middle of the frozen lake. But there was no sound, not even through the glass, only silence, and behind that version of me, the shadow stood closer than before, right behind my shoulder, already aligned, already placed. I stepped back again, hard. The cabin wall stopped me, cold against my spine. The ice outside stopped showing new scenes, but the old ones didn't fade. They stayed visible in the cracks, like the lake had already decided what was going to happen, and was simply waiting for me to reach it, slowly, one moment at a time. The wind outside shifted again, but it didn't bring sound with it, only movement. Soft, drifting snow pressed against the windows like it was trying to listen from the other side. Inside the cabin, everything felt unusually still. Even the warmth had changed. It wasn't spreading anymore. It was waiting. I found myself checking the clock more than once, even though it didn't seem to matter here. Time didn't feel like it was moving forward properly. It felt rearranged. That's when I noticed the messages on my phone. No signal, but somehow still receiving. The screen lit up on its own. One notification, then another, then several stacked on top of each other, all from the same name. A friend, Someone I remembered inviting. Someone who was supposed to come here. The messages were short. Simple. I'm close. Already inside? Why is it so quiet? I looked toward the cabin door. Still closed. Still locked. But something felt wrong about that certainty. Like the idea of outside wasn't stable anymore. I opened the door. Slowly. The air outside was colder than before, but it didn't rush in the way it should have. It just paused at the threshold, waiting. No footprints. No movement. No arrival. Only silence stretching across the frozen lake. I stepped back inside. The cabin felt different again. Not empty. Not full. Occupied in a way I couldn't prove. On the table, 2 cups of tea sat steaming. I stopped. I hadn't made them. I hadn't heard anything boil. But the steam rose steadily anyway, curling into the cold air like it belonged there. 1 cup was in front of my usual chair. The second was slightly to the side, waiting. I didn't touch them. The second chair creaked softly. I turned toward it. It had shifted, just a few centimeters closer to the table. Not enough to be obvious at first, but enough to notice now. The wood beneath it looked slightly worn in a way I didn't remember, like it had been used recently, repeatedly. I stepped back. The cabin responded with a small sound behind me. Not a knock, not a creak, just the faintest shift of something settling into place. As if the room had adjusted itself after realizing I was paying attention. The phone screen lit up again. Another message. I'm already here. I looked around the room slowly. The chairs, the cups, the shadows between the walls. Everything felt slightly misaligned, like the cabin had already accounted for another presence, and I was the only one still trying to understand where it was. Outside, the lake stayed frozen, but for a moment, I thought I saw a second reflection in the window, sitting where no one was sitting, drinking from the cup I never touched. The lake looked unchanged from a distance, flat, white, still, but I didn't trust stillness anymore. It never meant nothing here. I found myself walking toward the dock without planning it, the same way I had started moving toward the door, toward the window, toward every place I knew I shouldn't look too closely at. The wood beneath my feet creaked softly as I stepped onto it. Old, cold, frost clinging to the edges like it had been waiting for months without being disturbed. The air above the water felt heavier here, closer to the surface, like something was pressing upward from underneath, holding its place just below the ice. I stopped near the edge. The lake didn't move, but I heard something anyway. A voice, faint, carried through the frozen stillness, like it didn't belong to the air at all. It came from beneath the dock, not above, not around, underneath. I leaned forward slightly. The ice near the dock was thicker, but it wasn't uniform anymore. Small dark lines ran through it, like cracks that hadn't fully decided to break. The voice came again, closer this time, soft, careful. It wasn't calling out in panic. It was speaking like it already knew I would listen. I knelt slowly, placing my hand near the edge of the dock. Cold would press against my palm, and beneath it, a sound like breath trapped under glass. Then words formed through the ice. Not clear at first, broken, fragmented, but familiar in a way that made my chest tighten without reason. It knew things, not general things, specific ones, small memories I never told anyone. The way I used to sit near water as a child. The sound of a door I thought I had forgotten. The exact feeling of standing in this cabin before I even remembered arriving. My hand pulled back slightly. The voice paused, then continued, calmer now, almost patient, like it was waiting for me to recognize it. A thin crack ran across the ice near the dock. Not loud, not sharp, just enough to remind me that something was listening from below. Then the voice said something that stopped everything inside me. Not a command, not a warning, just a simple sentence. Let me in. I froze. The dock creaked under my weight, even though I hadn't moved. The lake beneath it stayed frozen, but the sound from below shifted again, closer, rising, and then the voice changed, not in tone, in familiarity. It sounded like me, not an imitation, not a copy, exactly me, speaking from somewhere under the ice. The realization didn't arrive quickly. It settled slowly, like cold water, filling a room I didn't know I was standing in. I stood up too fast. The dock creaked again, louder this time. The ice beneath it responded with a deep, dull pressure, not breaking, not cracking, just acknowledging, as if it had heard me, as if it had been expecting this exact moment. I stepped back from the edge, but the voice didn't fade. It stayed beneath the ice, waiting, still using my name like it had always belonged to it more than it belonged to me. The cabin lights changed before I noticed the pattern. At first, it was just flickering, soft, irregular, like old wiring struggling against the cold. But then the rhythm began to repeat. Not random anymore, structured. The entire room dimmed and brightened in a sequence that felt deliberate, like it was trying to speak without sound. I stood still in the center of the cabin, watching, listening with my eyes more than my ears. The light blinked once, pause, twice, pause again, then a longer sequence. 3 short flashes, 1 long, 2 short. My skin tightened, because it wasn't just repetition, it was communication. Outside, the lake responded. I saw it through the window, a faint pulse under the ice, blue light, matching the cabin exactly, like both were connected by something I couldn't see, but could feel pressing through the air between them. I moved closer to the glass. The light outside blinked again, in the same pattern, perfectly synchronized, too perfect, like the lake was copying what the cabin said, or the cabin was copying what the lake already knew. The floor beneath me hummed softly. Not sound, pressure, like electricity passing through it instead of wires. The lights blinked again, faster this time, more complex. The pattern grew longer. Irregular pauses forming between bursts of light, like sentences stretching into meaning. And then I realized something that made my breath slow. It wasn't just repeating. It was responding. The lake blinked first. The cabin answered. Then the lake responded again. Back and forth. A conversation without voices. I stepped back instinctively. The light in the corner of the room flickered out of sync. Just once. A delay. A mistake. But the lake didn't make mistakes. At least not like that. Then I noticed a reflection in the window. It wasn't matching the room anymore. The lights inside it blinked at a different rhythm. Slightly off. Almost human. Like something inside the reflection was thinking before it answered. The pattern changed again. Slower now. More deliberate. And for a brief moment, I understood a fragment of it. Not words. Intent. Something was being asked. Something was being answered. And I wasn't sure which side I belonged to. The lights in the cabin stopped abruptly. Complete darkness. Silence pressed in instantly, thick and close. Then, one final blink came from beneath the ice. Bright, blue, sustained longer than the others. Like a final sentence that didn't need translation. The cabin lights did not return, but the feeling of being included in the conversation did not leave. And somewhere beneath the frozen lake, the pattern continued without me. The cabin was colder in the morning. Not suddenly, not sharply, just less forgiving, like the warmth had been slowly removed during the night, without me noticing when it started. I walked across the floorboards carefully. Each step felt like it left a decision behind. Outside, the lake was still frozen, but it didn't look the same anymore. The surface had changed in subtle ways. Not cracks, not breaks, imprints. I stepped closer to the window and saw them clearly now. Shapes pressed into the ice beneath the snow. Human outlines. Not moving, not fading. Just there, as if something had been lying on the surface of the lake long enough to be remembered by it. But the ice wasn't soft. It shouldn't hold memory like that. I opened the door slowly. Cold air rushed in, but it didn't feel like wind. It felt like presence. The kind that knows exactly where you are without needing to look. I stepped onto the snow. The footprints I made didn't look normal. They sank too evenly, too perfectly shaped. And in some places, the snow beneath them melted slightly before freezing again. Heat that didn't belong. I followed the faint marks across the yard toward the lake. The imprints in the ice were clearer now. Not just shapes. Moments. Places where something had stood recently. Still warm in a way the world around them refused to accept. I knelt near one of them. The ice beneath it looked different, smoother, almost polished. I pressed my hand close without touching. A faint warmth rose through the surface. Impossible warmth. Like something had stood there long enough for the ice to remember its temperature. Behind me, the cabin creaked softly, but I hadn't moved. I turned slowly. Nothing there, only the cabin. Still, waiting. I looked back at the ice. The shapes had shifted slightly. Not gone, just repositioned, as if the lake was correcting its memory, making sure it remembered the right version of what had stood there. I stepped back. The warmth under my hand faded, slowly, like something letting go, but it didn't disappear completely. It stayed in fragments, scattered across the ice. Not random, not natural, planned, as if the lake had once been touched in many places at once, and was still trying to understand the pattern of that contact. I stood up. The wind moved for the first time in a while, but it didn't disturb the snow. It only passed through it, like the air itself had learned not to interfere. And I realized something I couldn't ignore anymore. The ice wasn't just freezing the lake. It was remembering everything that had ever touched it, and deciding what should still be here. I noticed it at the edge of my vision first. A shape where there should have been wall. A thin frame of wood that didn't match the rest of the cabin. At first, I thought it was a shadow, a trick of the cold light slipping through the boards. But shadows don't have depth. This did. I stepped closer, slowly, careful not to assume it would stay still if I moved too fast. The cabin creaked softly beneath me, like it was aware of where I was looking. The shape resolved into something impossible. A window, small, old, but not part of the original structure. I was sure of that. It wasn't here yesterday. It wasn't here before the storm. And it wasn't something I had ever seen before in any memory of this place. I reached toward it. My hand stopped just before the glass. It felt colder than anything else in the room. Not normal cold. Deep cold. The kind that doesn't belong on the surface of anything living. Through the window, I saw the lake, but not from above. From underneath. The ice looked like a ceiling now. Thick, heavy, holding the world in place. Dark water moved beneath it slowly, like something breathing in a space that should have been still. I leaned closer without meaning to. The view shifted slightly, as if whatever was inside the water had noticed me. And then I saw it. A hand pressed against the underside of the glass. Not breaking it, not pushing through, just resting there, waiting. The fingers moved once, slowly, like testing whether I would respond. A second later, another knock came, from inside the walls. Not the window, the walls. I turned sharply. The sound stopped. The cabin felt tighter again, smaller, like the space had folded in slightly while I wasn't paying attention. When I looked back at the window, the hand was gone, but the imprint remained, faint, fogged, like it had been there long enough to leave proof behind. Then the window flickered, not visually, structurally. For a split second, it wasn't showing the lake anymore. It showed the inside of the cabin, from a different angle, when I wasn't standing in. And in that angle, I saw myself looking at the window. But I wasn't moving. I wasn't reacting. I was just standing there, watching. The view snapped back to the lake beneath the ice, as if it had corrected itself, as if it had shown me something it wasn't supposed to. A soft knocking started again, this time slower. Patient, not urgent, just certain, like whatever was on the other side now knew the window existed, and knew I did too. I didn't remember falling asleep. That was the first thing I noticed. The second was the silence, not the lake silence, not the cabin silence. A deeper kind, the kind that feels like time itself has paused to listen. I was standing in a hallway I didn't recognize. Not outside, not inside either. Just between rooms that didn't agree on where I was supposed to be. The wood beneath my feet was colder than it should have been, and slightly damp, like something had been sleeping here longer than I had. A door at the end of the hallway was half open. Light spilled out in a thin, pale line. I moved toward it slowly. Each step felt delayed, like the floor was reacting after I had already left it. When I reached the doorway, I stopped. Inside the room, there was a bed, The same cabin bed. But something was wrong with the shape of it. Someone was lying on it. Me. Or something close enough to me that my mind refused to separate the difference immediately. I stood still, watching. The version of me on the bed wasn't fully asleep. It looked paused, like sleep wasn't rest, but a state it had been placed into. Then it moved, just slightly, a breath, slow, controlled. Before I had time to react, its eyes opened, not wide, not startled, familiar, like it had been expecting me to arrive. I stepped back instinctively. The floor creaked. The version of me on the bed reacted a second earlier than I did. It sat up, slowly, and looked directly at me. No confusion, no shock, just recognition, like it had already seen this moment before I had entered it. A small notebook lay beside it on the bed. It wasn't there before. I was sure of it. It opened without being touched. Pages already filled with writing. My writing. But I didn't remember writing any of it. The sleeping version of me turned slightly toward the notebook, then back toward me, as if checking whether I would understand what I was looking at. The air in the room shifted. Heavier, closer. The kind of pressure that forms when two versions of the same moment refuse to align. The sleep in me stood up, slowly, careful, like it wasn't fully convinced which version of the floor was real. It looked at its hands, then at mine, matching, almost perfectly, except its skin looked colder, less current, like it had been waiting longer than I had. A faint sound came from behind the walls, soft, like writing, or scratching, or pages turning somewhere inside the structure of the cabin itself. The sleeping version of me took a step forward. I stepped back. It stopped. We both did. For a moment, neither of us moved. Like the room couldn't decide which one of us was supposed to continue the story. Then it spoke. Not out loud, but close enough that I felt it more than heard it. A thought that wasn't mine. You woke up too early. The notebook on the bed flipped one page on its own, and I saw the next line already written, waiting for me to become it. The first sound came from the cabin itself. A small creak, wood settling, normal enough to ignore, if anything here could still be called normal. But then it happened again. The same creak, identical, same pitch, same timing, same hollow ending. I stopped moving, listening. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It felt prepared, like it was waiting to repeat something. Then my footsteps shifted slightly as I moved. One step, soft, careful, and the lake outside answered. A delayed echo drifted in through the walls. My step repeated again, but wrong, slightly stretched, slightly deeper, like something had copied it after thinking about it too long. I froze completely. The sound outside repeated again. Not my step, a version of it, slower, heavier, as if the lake was learning the shape of movement through imitation. I stepped once more, testing it. The cabin heard me. Then the lake repeated me. But this time, the echo added something I didn't do. A second footstep. Behind mine. I turned sharply. Nothing in the room. Only the dim cabin light. And the frozen window watching back. I didn't move again. But the echo did. It repeated the silence. Not the sound of silence. The silence itself. Twice. Uneven. Like it was trying to understand what absence felt like. I backed away slowly. The lake outside remained still. But the echoes didn't. They continued. Now independent. No longer attached to me. The sound system had separated. Like the lake had stopped copying me. And started copying anything it could hear. A whisper formed near the window. Not mine. Not fully formed. Just a broken imitation of breath turning into sound. I didn't speak. But the echo responded anyway, repeating a voice I never used. The words were wrong, but the tone wasn't. It sounded like me trying to sound calm, trying to sound alone, trying and failing. I stepped back again. The floor creaked. The lake answered instantly. Too fast this time, as if it had been waiting just beneath the surface for that exact trigger. The echo didn't just repeat anymore. It anticipated. I stopped making sound entirely. Held my breath. No movement. No step. No shift. For a few seconds, the cabin became completely still. Even the ice outside stopped responding. Then, from somewhere beneath everything, a sound formed anyway. A breath. Mine. Even though I wasn't breathing. It repeated once. Then again. Closer. Inside the cabin. Not from outside. Not from memory. From somewhere that had learned the shape of me without needing permission. And in that moment, I realized the worst part wasn't that the lake could copy sound. It was that it no longer needed the original to exist. The lake changed slowly that day. Not in movement. In clarity. The snow above the ice thinned in certain places, as if something beneath the surface was pushing the world just slightly upward, asking it to be seen. I stood by the window for a long time before I understood what I was looking at. At first, it looked like distortion, like water under glass that didn't want to stay still. Then the shape became structured, straight lines, angles, walls, a roof, another cabin, under the ice, perfectly aligned beneath the one I was standing in. I stepped closer. My breath fogged the glass, but the view below didn't blur. It stayed sharp, too sharp. The cabin under the lake mirrored mine exactly. Same shape, same rooms, same stillness. But it was darker, not empty, just deeper in time, like it existed in a version of night that hadn't finished happening yet. Lights flickered inside it, slow, uneven, like something was moving through each room, pausing just long enough to be noticed before continuing on. I watched the hallway and saw movement, a figure walking, then stopping, then turning. I leaned closer, without meaning to. The reflection of my breath on the glass trembled, and inside the submerged cabin, I saw myself, walking, but not where I was now, not in this cabin. In that one, under the ice. I stepped back fast. The image didn't disappear. It continued, slowly pacing through rooms that mirrored mine, but reversed in weight and feeling. Like the lake wasn't showing a reflection. It was showing an alternate version that had already decided how the story continued. Then something changed. The lights inside the submerged cabin shifted. They aligned with mine. Perfect synchronization. For a moment, both cabins, above and below, moved in the same rhythm. Same flicker. Same silence between pulses. Then the version under the ice stopped and looked up, directly, not at the cabin above. At me. A pressure formed in my chest I couldn't explain. Like the space between both versions of reality had just become aware of itself. The submerged version of me lifted a hand, slow, controlled, pressing it against the inside of its window, the exact place where I stood, but from below. The ice above it didn't crack. It didn't react. It only held, like it was meant to. I stepped back again. The cabin around me felt suddenly less real, not disappearing, just less certain, like it was no longer sure it was the original. And for the first time, I wasn't sure either. The sound came at midnight, not from the cabin, not from outside, from below. A single tone, clear, perfect, a doorbell. I sat up immediately. The silence before it had been heavy, layered, almost physical, and then that sound cut through it like something remembering how to exist. I stayed still, waiting for it to repeat. It didn't at first. Only the lake outside reacted. A faint vibration under the ice, barely visible, like something had tapped the underside of the frozen world and waited to see if it would respond. Then the doorbell rang again. Same tone, same distance, wrong place. I stood slowly. The cabin floor creaked beneath me, but the sound felt unrelated to me now, like I was only borrowing weight from the room. I moved toward the window. The lake was unchanged at first glance. Flat, frozen, quiet, but the ice beneath the surface shimmered faintly with a dim blue pulse, matching the rhythm of the sound. Ring, pause, ring. Each time the tone came, the ice reacted, not breaking, not cracking, just acknowledging, like it recognized the signal. There was no doorbell outside. I knew that. There never had been. Yet the sound repeated again. Closer now, not in distance, in understanding, as if it was learning how the cabin interpreted it. I pressed my hand lightly against the window. The glass was warm again, unnaturally so. The doorbell rang a third time. And this time, the cabin answered with faint vibration in its walls. Not sound, movement, like the structure itself had briefly considered opening. I stepped back. The room felt different, not changed in shape, changed in intention, like the space had started interpreting the sound as an instruction rather than noise. The lake outside pulsed again, and for a brief moment, I saw something beneath the ice. Not a figure, not a shape, a presence aligned perfectly beneath the cabin's front door. Waiting, patient, the doorbell rang again, this time softer, almost gentle, like a knock disguised as a memory. The cabin door trembled slightly, not opening, not closing, just reacting, as if it had almost decided to respond. I didn't move, neither did the sound. We stayed like that for a long moment. Me inside, it below the ice, both waiting for the other to decide what open meant. Then the ringing stopped, suddenly, cleanly, but the silence that followed wasn't relief. It was permission, and I couldn't tell any more who had been given it. The storm arrived like it had been waiting outside the edge of the world, but it didn't enter. It stopped right at the boundary of the cabin. Snow hung in the air beyond the windows, suspended mid-fall, as if time had forgotten to finish the motion. Nothing touched the ground. Nothing changed position. It was like the entire storm had been paused, and only this place had been left active inside it. I stood near the glass for a long time, watching flakes of snow frozen in impossible stillness. Some were tilted sideways. Some were halfway through drifting downward. All of them held in place like the sky had turned into a memory instead of weather. The cabin, however, continued. Subtle creaks, soft shifting warmth, a faint pulse beneath the floorboards that never fully stopped. Everything outside was paused. Everything inside was not. I tested it without thinking. I moved my hand. Slowly, the air inside responded normally. But the moment my fingers crossed toward the window, the storm outside reacted, not by moving, by noticing. The frozen snowflakes seemed to align slightly, all at once, like something had focused its attention on the exact position of my hand. I pulled back immediately. The alignment broke. Everything outside returned to its frozen stillness, but the feeling remained. Observation. I stepped away from the window. The cabin creaked again, but differently this time, like it was adjusting itself to the fact that the outside world had stopped while it hadn't. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Not inside, not outside. Between them, the hallway light flickered once, even though no wind touched the cabin. I moved slowly toward it. Each step felt delayed, like the floor was deciding whether I was allowed to continue. The hallway was empty, but the temperature wasn't. A cold pressure sat in the air, heavier than the rest of the cabin, like something had just passed through here, but left part of itself behind. I stopped halfway down the hall. The silence changed again. It felt tighter, more structured, as if the storm outside wasn't gone. It was simply locked in place, watching from every frozen angle. Then I noticed something impossible. The snow outside the window nearest the hall had shifted, not fallen, not melted, moved slightly closer, as if the storm itself had leaned toward the cabin, not continuing, not retreating, just waiting for permission to start again. And in that suspended world, I realized something that made the air feel even thinner. If everything outside was frozen in time, then whatever was moving inside the cabin was not supposed to be part of it. The stillness outside the cabin changed before I saw it. Not the storm, not the ice. Something deeper, like the lake had shifted its attention from simply existing to watching. I stood at the window, without moving for a long time. The frozen storm still hung in the air beyond the glass. Every snowflake locked in place like a suspended thought, but beneath it, the lake began to glow. Two faint shapes appeared under the ice. At first, they looked like distortions in the deep water beneath the frozen surface, but then they sharpened, becoming symmetrical, intentional. Eyes, not human, not animal, just present. They didn't blink. They didn't move. They simply held their position beneath the ice, aligned perfectly with where I stood. I stepped back instinctively. The floor creaked under me, and the sound felt like an interruption in something that had already been focused on me. The eyes under the lake shifted slightly, not turning, just adjusting, like they were correcting their angle of observation. The ice between us pulsed faintly with blue light, slow, rhythmic, matching something I couldn't hear but could feel in my chest. The reflection in the window no longer matched my movement. When I moved my head slightly, the reflection stayed still for a fraction longer, then followed, delayed, careful, like it was no longer certain which version of me it was supposed to obey. The cabin lights flickered once. Then again, the eyes beneath the ice responded, brightening, not aggressively, not violently, just with awareness, like recognition. The lake was no longer passive. It was awake. I stepped closer to the glass again, despite every instinct telling me not to. The eyes followed, perfectly. Then something changed in the reflection. The cabin behind me was no longer fully aligned with reality. Walls felt slightly shifted, distances uncertain, as if the room had begun to adjust itself around the fact that it was being observed. The eyes under the ice widened slightly, not in shape, in presence, and for a brief moment, I understood what it meant. The lake wasn't looking at the cabin. It was looking through it, like the entire structure above the ice was only a thin layer between it and whatever was inside me. The blue glow deepened. The storm outside remained frozen, but the eyes beneath the lake did not. They continued watching. And now, I couldn't tell anymore whether I was the one inside the cabin, or already part of what I was looking at. The cabin was colder in the morning than it had any right to be. Not sharp cold, not biting cold, a slow cold, the kind that spreads without permission, like it has already decided where it belongs. I woke up standing near the window. I don't remember getting there. Outside, the frozen storm was still suspended in midair, every snowflake held in place like the world had forgotten how to continue. But the glass in front of me was different. Frost had formed overnight, not random patterns, not natural branching ice. Letters, carefully shaped lines carved into the surface from the inside. I stepped closer. My breath touched the glass and thawed part of it, but the message stayed clear beneath it. Stay inside. I froze. The words were not just written. They felt repeated, layered, like the ice had heard them many times before and was still trying to get the tone right. I looked away for a second, then looked back. More frost had formed, as if the message had continued while I wasn't watching. Stay inside. Again, same shape, same placement, but heavier this time, like pressure had been added to the meaning. I turned slowly. The cabin behind me felt reorganized, not physically, but in attention, like the walls had shifted their awareness toward the windows. Listening, waiting. Then I noticed the floorboards near the door. They were slightly frosted too, thin white lines spreading outward from the edges of the room, not from outside. From within, I stepped back. The frost responded. It spread a little further, as if it was following my movement. I stopped moving entirely. The cabin did too. For a moment, perfect silence. Then, a whisper came from the walls. Not words first, breath, then imitation. It tried to form language using my own rhythm of thinking. Outside, the frozen storm remained still, but the cabin no longer needed it to move. The message on the glass changed again, slowly, carefully, like it was being rewritten in real time. Stay, then a pause, then, inside. The separation felt intentional, like the cabin was teaching me how to understand it in smaller pieces. Behind me, the door creaked slightly, not opening, not closing, just acknowledging. The frost on the floor crept another inch forward, quiet, certain, not chasing, just confirming. And in that moment, I realized something that made my throat tighten. The cabin wasn't warning me anymore. It was agreeing with itself. I don't remember deciding to leave. It just became the only thought left that felt like my own. The cabin was quiet in a way that felt controlled now, like even silence had been placed carefully between the walls. The frost on the glass still held the words from before, faint but present, like they refused to fade completely. Stay inside. I didn't look at them for long. I couldn't. I moved toward the door. Each step felt heavier than the last, like the cabin was quietly adjusting the way the floor beneath me to slow me down. The handle was colder than before, damp, almost alive in how it reacted to my hand. I pulled it open. The air outside didn't rush in. It hesitated, like it wasn't sure it was allowed to move anymore. I stepped out anyway. The frozen world was still suspended, snowflakes hanging in midair, the storm unchanged, time still locked in place beyond the cabin. But the moment my foot touched the snow, something reset, not loudly, not visibly, just a subtle shift. The ground beneath me felt slightly closer to the cabin than before. I stopped, turned back. The cabin was exactly where it should be, but my position wasn't. I tried to step away again. One step, then another, and I was suddenly back at the door, standing where I had just left. My breath caught. I looked down at my footprints. They were gone. Fresh snow covered them completely, like I had never moved at all. I tried again. Walked farther this time. Faster. More certain. The world blurred slightly at the edges. And then I was back again, at the cabin door. Same position. Same silence. Same stillness, waiting for me to understand it. I turned around sharply. The lake hadn't moved. The storm hadn't moved. But something in the space between them felt tighter, like the world had folded slightly around me each time I tried to leave. I stepped forward again, then stopped, because I noticed something new. The cabin door was already open, slightly, like it had been waiting for me to return before I had even left. Behind me, the frozen storm remained suspended. Ahead of me, the cabin waited, patient, unchanged, as if every direction I took had already been accounted for. And no matter how far I walked, I was still arriving at the same place. I stopped trying to leave after a while, not because I accepted it, but because the attempt no longer felt like movement. It felt like repetition. The cabin was quiet again, not empty, not safe, just final in a way I couldn't explain. The frost on the windows had softened overnight, but the message was still there beneath it, faint like it had been absorbed into the glass itself. Stay inside. I stood in the center of the room for a long time, without moving, listening, not for sound, for change. But nothing in the cabin changed anymore unless I acknowledged it first. That was the new pattern. Outside, the frozen storm still hung in place. Snow suspended midair like a paused thought. The lake beneath it remained still, watching, waiting, but it didn't feel distant anymore. It felt connected, like it no longer needed distance to observe me. I walked slowly toward the table. The cups were still there, 2 of them. One slightly shifted again from where I remembered leaving it. I didn't touch them. I already knew they would feel warm, or cold, depending on what I expected first. Instead, I looked at my hands. They looked normal, but not fully current, like they belonged to a version of me that had been here longer than I could remember, a memory that wasn't finished yet. Behind me, the floor creaked softly. I didn't turn right away, because I knew there would be nothing new to see. And I was right. Nothing was there, only the cabin, still arranged exactly as it always was. Except now I could feel it differently, not as space, but as recording. Every step I took felt like it was being stored rather than lived. Every breath felt like it was being kept. The lake outside didn't move, but I could feel it under everything now, not beneath the ice, beneath the idea of the cabin itself. A final knock came from somewhere I couldn't locate. Not the walls, not the door, not the floor. Inside, a slow, patient pressure in my chest, like something on the other side of me had finally reached the inside of the same place I was standing in. I didn't move, because I understood, finally, that movement wasn't escape here. It was confirmation. The cabin didn't stop me from leaving. It simply made sure there was never anywhere else to arrive. And in the quiet that followed, I realized something that settled deeper than fear. There was no version of this place where I was already gone, only versions where I was still noticing.